There was once a restaurant owned by a man named Yakov. It was the only Israelite restaurant owned in the town, as all the other businesses were owned by the Gentiles. It was said that the food was so good that Israelites would travel from afar to eat at Yakov's restaurant. It was a place where Israelites could go after a long day's work, recharge, and enjoy a good meal. And while Yakov's restaurant was a nice place to go and unwind, there was a secret that no one knew. Yakov was a bad boss who refused to listen to his employees' complaints. He was only concerned about himself rather than others. He oppressed his staff, abused his authority, and he did not follow the guidelines that he gave to his employees. He placed heavy burdens on his staff and never offered others any help. He knew that most of his employees needed him because they had families that they had to take care of, so he took full advantage of the situations and oppressed the helpless for personal gain. But when customers visited the restaurant, Yakov always pretended that everything was okay. He liked to be noticed by others, and he wanted his ownership of the restaurant to be known. He wanted everyone to know that he sat in a high place of honor, and because his restaurant was so prestigious, outwardly everything appeared okay, but inwardly he suffered from major dishonesty. His bad leadership was threatening, unpredictable, hostile, and irrational. He appeared to be insecure and didn't like the thought of anything being out of his control, which in return hindered his staff's performance, and which led them to feeling undervalued. The problem with Yakov is he was arrogant and rarely saw his own faults. He had what is called a God complex, in which he could only see faults in others. He lacked the ability to introspect, and he did not care that others were damaged by his leadership. Yakov cared very little about his employees' growth and/or success. He communicated very little with them, and when he did, he provided misleading information. But the strange thing is, he never fired his employees. He allowed them to stay as long as they wanted, but not without making their environment very toxic. Finally, to the point, many of his employees became frustrated and decided to leave. The abuse from Yakov was so intense that the employees decided that they would not work for another black-owned business. They went and worked for the Gentiles who had businesses in the city. Some of them even went to work in a local library and began to read books on how they can become successful on their own. After about 15 years of working for a man who abused his leadership, many of the Israelites had to learn how to rebuild from scratch. Many of them had to reteach themselves that life begins with faith and also ends with faith, which provides stability for the soul during difficult times. And although it's hard to have to start all over, they had to remind themselves that Yahuwah was their refuge and strength, and he was a very present help in their time of trouble. In fact, he gave them the very strength that they needed to get up and leave an abusive relationship. Psalms 46:1 tells us to trust in Yahuwah at all times and for his people to pour out their hearts before him, because he is our refuge. After most of Yakov's employees decided to leave, he had to downsize to a smaller building. He could no longer afford the upscale restaurant that he used to own, so the owners kicked him out. The few employees who decided to stay still suffered the abuse of Yakov. You know how the story goes. There are always those ones who will decide to stay and suffer abuse. Some of the customers followed Yakov over to his new store, on the poorer side of town, but others got wind of his abusive behavior and decided not to support his business any longer. Yakov didn't have enough staff to maintain his business, and the upkeep of the store became very poor. Despite the circumstances, Yakov continued to brag about his establishment. Even in such bad circumstances, Yakov cared nothing about the upkeep of the store. He had hit rock bottom, but because he was so puffed up, he did not notice that he was in a situation that would befall him completely. Yakov's situation continued to spiral downwards, but he didn't care. His arrogance continued, and even though he could clearly see that he was self-destructing, he refused to listen to Yahuwah's words, in which was the blueprint on how to run his business. Instead, as the situation progressively got worse, he was only concerned about himself being the leader and the owner of his store. What type of person could possibly suffer from this high level of insanity? Who could still be so arrogant, boastful, and excited about the destruction of their business? Well, needless to say, in my imaginary story, Yakov had to completely close his store. His arrogance caused the rest of his employees to walk out, and he could no longer maintain his restaurant. And even though Yakov lost everything, to this day, he still brags about his position in the business. The thing that I've always liked about being able to write my own story is that I can make the ending victorious. The Israelites gathered together and decided to open up a new restaurant under new management. They were happy to be back in the business that they've always known. The good news is that the new owner had great leadership skills. He was a righteous man who possessed integrity. He was not artificial. He was genuine in his character, honest in speech, and faithful to his promises. He didn't slander with his tongue, nor did he do evil against the people who worked for him. And what made him such a powerful leader is that he would pray to Yahuwah for wisdom on how to govern his people wisely. He took heed to the wise counseling of the Most High. This brought stability to those under his care. He was honest and gracious, and he always searched to find facts when people came to him with matters. He was a selfless man, humble, gentle, patient, compassionate, and kind, who truly appreciated the work that others had to offer. He encouraged and built up his people. He pursued peace rather than strife. He also recognized his authority and used it to serve others, not to tear them down. And although it is his job to reprimand when necessary, it was only done to make his people better. This was because he sincerely desired their success. He was slow to anger and used wise and gracious words. He communicates clearly and constantly, and in a collaborative manner. He didn't tell his employees to be quiet. He sought their advice, and he listened to their concerns. He consulted with them and took their ideas into consideration to come up with the best solutions for the success of their business. The new person in the leadership role encouraged the Israelites to be the best that they could be, and he was well respected because he was still tough when he needed to be. The Israelites at the restaurant went on to be successful, and their business grew. This is the end of this story. The Most High sent the Holy Spirit to me this morning and told me to put this story together. I don't know how you're going to take it, but I'd love to hear your views on it in the comments section. As long as you're not dropping rude or hateful comments, please, by all means, share your thoughts. I was personally uplifted by this story. I just felt like the Most High is always with us, and He works with us in all circumstances for our good. And just like Romans 8:28 says, we know that all things work together for good for those who love Yahuwah and those who are called according to his purpose. And as Romans chapter 8 and verse 31 says, what shall we then say to these things? If Elohim be for us, who can be against us? This concludes my video. May Yahuwah bless you and keep you all safe in this dark hour. And until my next video, Shalom.